The afternoon sun hung high above the city, casting long reflections on the glass, windows of buildings, and warming the busy streets below. It was one of those ordinary days when people rushed from one place to another, focused on schedules, deadlines, and responsibilities. On Route 22, one of the city's busiest bus lines, passengers filled nearly every seat. Some stared quietly out of the windows. Others scrolled through their phones. A few talked softly to friends sitting beside them. The bus moved steadily through traffic, stopping every few blocks to pick up more passengers. Near the middle of the bus sat a 14-year-old girl named Amara. Amara had just finished a long day at school. Her backpack rested on her lap, and a pair of headphones hung loosely around her neck. She looked tired, but calm, the way someone does after a full day of classes, homework discussions, and crowded hallways. Still, there was something gentle about her presence. Something observant. Amara liked watching people, not in a strange way, just quietly noticing things. She noticed the elderly woman, who struggled slightly to hold onto the pole when the bus turned. She noticed the construction workers who looked exhausted after a long shift. She noticed the mother trying to keep her young child entertained. Most people didn't notice these things, but Amara did. The bus stopped again at the next corner. The doors opened with a soft mechanical sound. Several new passengers stepped inside. Among them was an older man. At first glance, he didn't look particularly different from anyone else boarding the bus that afternoon. He wore a simple gray jacket, dark trousers, and a small hat that shaded his face slightly. But what caught Amara's attention was the way he moved. Slowly, carefully, not weak but clearly tired. The bus was almost full now. The man looked around, searching quietly for an empty seat. There weren't many left. Amara watched as he walked down the aisle, holding onto the rail for balance as the bus gently started moving again. A few passengers glanced up briefly, then returned to their phones. Someone shifted slightly in their seat but didn't offer space. The man continued looking. That's when Amara made a decision. Without making a big scene, she stood up. "Sir," she said kindly, "you can take my seat." The man looked surprised. He hadn't expected that. For a moment, he simply stared at her, as if making sure he had heard correctly. "You sure?" he asked. Amara nodded with a small smile. "Yes, I'm getting off soon anyway." That wasn't entirely true. Her stop was still several blocks away, but she didn't mind standing. The man studied her face for a moment, as though trying to understand something deeper than just the offer itself. Then he nodded gratefully. "Thank you." He sat down carefully in the seat Amara had just left. A few nearby passengers had noticed the exchange. Some smiled. Others nodded approvingly. Small acts of kindness like that didn't happen often on crowded city buses anymore. Amara held onto the rail as the bus continued moving through traffic. The older man adjusted slightly in the seat and let out a quiet breath, clearly relieved to sit. For the next few minutes, the bus ride continued normally. The sound of the engine, the murmur of conversation, the occasional stop. But the man sitting in Amara's former seat kept glancing up at her from time to time. Not in a strange way, more like someone thinking about something. Eventually, he spoke again. "You didn't have to do that," he said. Amara shrugged lightly. "It's okay." The man smiled faintly. "You remind me of someone." Amara tilted her head slightly. "Who?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out the window. For a moment as the bus passed, a row of stores and traffic lights. "Someone who believed in treating people well," he finally said. Amara smiled politely, though she didn't think much of it at the time. To her, giving up a seat wasn't a big deal. It was just something her parents had always taught her. If someone needed help, you helped them. A few stops later, the bus became even more crowded. People squeezed into the aisle, holding onto poles and overhead straps. The driver announced the next stop through the speaker. The city outside buzzed with activity. Shops, pedestrians, cyclists weaving through traffic. The man suddenly reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Amara noticed but didn't pay too much attention. He pulled out a small notebook, then a pen. At first, it seemed like he was about to write something, but instead he looked up at her again. "What's your name?" he asked. "Amara," she replied. "That's a beautiful name." "Thank you." He nodded thoughtfully as if remembering it carefully. Meanwhile, a few passengers nearby had started noticing their conversation. There was something about the man's calm presence that made people curious. Then something unexpected happened. At the next stop, two people boarded the bus quickly, one holding a camera bag and the other carrying what looked like a small microphone case. They looked around the bus, scanning the seats. Then their eyes landed on the older man. Their expressions changed immediately. Surprise, respect, and something else, recognition. One of them whispered quietly, "Is that?" The other nodded. "I think it is." Amara noticed the sudden attention but didn't understand why. The two newcomers walked closer, not aggressively, but with clear purpose. When they reached the man, one of them spoke politely. "Excuse me, sir." The man looked up calmly. "Yes?" The person hesitated for a moment, then said, "We didn't expect to see you here." Amara's curiosity grew. What was happening? Why did they seem so surprised? The man simply smiled slightly, just riding the bus like everyone else. But the reaction of the people nearby told a different story. A few passengers were now whispering. Someone pulled out their phone. Another person leaned closer, trying to get a better look. Amara looked between the man and the two people standing near him. She had a feeling something important was about to be revealed, but she had no idea how big that revelation would be. The man turned slightly toward her again, and what he said next would soon shock not just Amara, but the entire bus. The bus slowed as it approached the next stop, but something inside had already begun to change. Passengers who had previously been quiet and focused on their phones were now looking up. The moment between the older man and the two people who had just boarded had caught everyone's attention. Amara tightened her grip on the overhead rail as the bus gently turned the corner. She could feel curiosity building around her. The two people standing near the older man exchanged a quick glance before speaking again. "Sir," the man with the camera bag said politely, "we weren't expecting to run into you here." The older man chuckled softly. "Well," he replied calmly, "that's usually how public transportation works." A few passengers nearby laughed quietly. But the two visitors still looked surprised. One of them leaned closer and said in a respectful tone, "People are going to be shocked when they find out you're here." Amara blinked. "Find out what?" The older man raised an eyebrow slightly. "Are they?" Then he glanced toward the rest of the bus. Several people were now clearly watching the conversation. Phones had started coming out. Whispers traveled through the aisle. "Who is he? Do you know him? I feel like I've seen him somewhere." Amara felt the same confusion. She studied the man more closely now. His clothes were simple, nothing flashy, but there was something about the way he carried himself. Calm, confident, observant, as if he was used to being watched. The woman with the microphone case smiled politely. "Sir," she said, "do you mind if we say hello properly?" The man nodded. Of course. She turned slightly toward the small group of passengers who had gathered attention around them. Then she said something that immediately changed the entire atmosphere inside the bus. "Ladies and gentlemen, you might not realize it," she said, "but you're currently riding with someone very important." The bus grew quiet. Even the sound of conversation faded. Amara felt her heart beat a little faster. "Important?" The camera bag man added, "This is Mr. Elias Carter." For a moment, the name didn't mean much to Amara, but for several passengers on the bus, it meant everything. A man near the back suddenly said loudly, "Wait, the Elias Carter?" Another passenger gasped. "No way." Someone quickly searched the name on their phone. Within seconds, whispers spread through the bus like electricity. "Oh my gosh, that's him. Looks surprised like I'm different from anyone else on this bus." She hesitated. "Well, you are kind of famous," he smiled. "Maybe, but today I'm just someone who needed a seat." A few passengers chuckled again. The tension on the bus eased slightly, but now everyone was paying attention. Phones were recording. People were whispering. Some even started recognizing him more clearly. One passenger leaned toward another and said, "That's the guy who started those school scholarships last year." Another said, "He funded that new hospital wing." Someone else added, "My nephew got a job through his foundation." Amara listened carefully. She had seen his face before on TV. Now she remembered. But she still didn't understand something. Why was someone like him riding the bus? The camera bag man asked the same question. "Sir, people usually expect you to arrive with drivers and security." Mr. Carter leaned back slightly in the seat. "Sometimes," he said calmly, "it's important to see the world the way most people live it." The bus fell quiet again. Even the driver glanced in the mirror. Mr. Carter continued, "When you ride in expensive cars all the time, you stop noticing things." He gestured around the bus. "But here, you see everything." Amara thought about that. It made sense. Then he looked back at her. "And today I noticed something important." Amara looked confused again. "What?" He smiled warmly. "You." Now several people leaned closer. The moment suddenly felt significant. "You gave up your seat without hesitation," he continued. Most people looked away. Amara shrugged slightly. "I just thought you were tired." "That's exactly my point," he said. A quiet pause followed. Then he said something that surprised everyone again. You know, small actions reveal a lot about a person. A passenger near the front whispered, "He's right." Mr. Carter continued speaking. Not loudly, but clearly enough for people nearby to hear. In business, people talk about leadership all the time. But real character shows up in everyday moments. He looked around the bus. This young girl showed more awareness in 10 seconds than many adults do all day. The passengers began nodding. Some smiled at Amara. She felt shy now. "I didn't do anything special," she said. But Mr. Carter shook his head again. "That's where you're wrong." Then something unexpected happened. He stood up from the seat. The bus slowed again at another stop, but now everyone was focused on him. Mr. Carter turned to face Amara fully. "What school do you go to?" he asked. She answered. "And what do you want to do when you grow up?" Amara hesitated. "I'm not sure yet." He smiled. "That's okay." Then he reached into his jacket again. But this time, he pulled out something different. Not a notebook, not a phone, a small card holder. Passengers leaned closer. Amara watched carefully. Mr. Carter pulled out a single card and handed it to her. "Keep this," he said. She looked down at the card. It had his name on it, and a number. Then he said something that made the entire bus go silent. "If you ever need help chasing your dreams, call that number." Amara's eyes widened again. The bus exploded with reactions. "No way. That's incredible. Did that just happen?" Someone in the back whispered. "This is going viral for sure." But Mr. Carter wasn't finished yet, because the next thing he said would shock Amara even more, and it would turn this simple bus ride into a story the entire city would soon hear about. For a few seconds after Mr. Elias Carter handed Amara the card, the entire bus felt unusually quiet. Not the normal quiet of people minding their own business, but the kind of silence that happens when something surprising has just occurred, and everyone is trying to process it. Amara stared down at the card in her hand. Her fingers tightened slightly around it, as if she wasn't sure whether it was real. People around her leaned closer, curious to see what was written on it. Someone whispered, "Is that actually his card?" Another person said, "That number probably connects directly to his office." Phones were still recording. The moment had clearly become something bigger than an ordinary bus ride. But Mr. Carter looked completely relaxed, as if this kind of attention didn't bother him at all. Instead, he spoke to Amara again in the same calm voice he had used since the beginning. "Kindness should always be recognized," he said. Amara looked up at him, still a little stunned. "But I didn't do it for anything," she replied. "I know," Mr. Carter said with a gentle smile. "That's exactly why it matters." The bus driver slowed again as they approached another stop. Outside, the city continued moving as usual. Cars, pedestrians, traffic lights changing from red to green. Inside the bus, though, the atmosphere had completely shifted. Passengers who had never spoken to each other before were now discussing what had just happened. One woman said quietly, "I've lived in this city for years, and I've never seen something like this." Another passenger nodded. People usually ignore each other on public transport. Meanwhile, the two individuals who had first recognized Mr. Carter, the ones carrying the camera equipment, were still standing nearby. One of them leaned toward Mr. Carter and said, "Sir, the story of this moment is going to spread very fast." Mr. Carter chuckled softly. "Maybe," he replied. "But that's not the important part." He looked at Amara again. "The important part is what it reminds people to do." Amara was beginning to understand something. This moment wasn't really about fame or money. It was about the small decision she had made earlier. The simple act of offering her seat. The bus continued moving, but now almost everyone inside felt connected by the moment they had just witnessed. Then something unexpected happened again. A notification sound started ringing from several phones at once. One passenger looked down at their screen and gasped. Wait, someone already posted the video. Another person checked their phone. Oh wow, it's spreading. The video clip showing Amara offering her seat, followed by the reveal of Mr. Carter's identity, had already been uploaded online by one of the passengers. Within minutes, it was gaining attention. Fast, very fast. Amara's stop was approaching soon. The driver announced it over the speaker. Next stop, Maple Street. Amara realized it was time for her to get off the bus. But now she felt a little nervous. Everything that had just happened felt unreal. She looked at Mr. Carter again. "Thank you," she said quietly. He raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For everything." Mr. Carter smiled warmly. "You already did the important part." She nodded. Then she stepped toward the bus door as it opened. Before she exited, Mr. Carter said one last thing. "Amara." She turned around. "Yes?" "Never stop being the person who offered that seat today." She smiled. "I won't." And with that, she stepped off the bus and onto the sidewalk. The bus doors closed behind her, and Route 22 continued down the street. But inside the bus, passengers were still talking about the moment they had just experienced. Meanwhile, outside the bus, Amara walked home, still holding the card tightly. She didn't fully realize yet that the video from the bus was now being shared all across the city. And not just locally, within hours, thousands of people had watched it. Then hundreds of thousands. News outlets picked up the story quickly. Headlines started appearing online. A teen's simple act of kindness goes viral. A bus ride that restored people's faith in humanity. Young girl surprises famous entrepreneur. By evening, the video had reached millions of views. Amara's parents were the first to notice. When Amara arrived home, her mother was sitting on the couch staring at her phone in disbelief. "Amara," she said slowly, "what happened on the bus today?" Amara blinked. "How did you know?" Her mother turned the phone around to show her the video. Amara's eyes widened. "That's me." Her father walked into the room as well. "Apparently," he said, smiling proudly. "The whole city knows that now." But the story didn't end there. The next morning, something even more surprising happened. Amara's school principal called an assembly. Students filled the auditorium, whispering and wondering why everyone had been gathered together. Then the principal stepped onto the stage. "We want to recognize someone today," she announced. Amara felt a strange feeling in her stomach. Then her name was called. The entire auditorium turned toward her. Some students had already seen the video online. Whispers spread quickly. "That's her. She's the girl from the bus." Amara slowly walked toward the stage, feeling both shy and nervous. But when she reached the front, something unexpected happened. Standing near the principal was Mr. Elias Carter. The entire room gasped. Students started whispering loudly now. "No way. He actually came here." Mr. Carter smiled as Amara approached. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she replied, still surprised. The principal spoke again. "Yesterday, Amara reminded our entire city what kindness looks like." Students began clapping. Then Mr. Carter spoke. "I've met many successful people in my life," then he said. "But character matters more than success." He paused briefly. And yesterday, Amara showed something very important. The room grew quiet. Small actions can inspire big change. Then he made an announcement that stunned everyone. "My foundation will be creating a new scholarship program, and it will be named after the value Amara demonstrated." Students reacted with excitement. Teachers smiled proudly. Amara stood there, overwhelmed but happy. She had simply offered a seat on a bus. But that one moment had traveled across the city, inspiring thousands of people. Later that day, the video continued spreading across social media. People commented things like, "This restored my faith in humanity. Kindness still exists. We need more stories like this." And somewhere in the city, on Route 22, passengers continued riding the bus. Many of them remembering the moment when a simple act of kindness turned into something unforgettable. Because sometimes the smallest decisions create the biggest stories.